Hello and welcome to LinuxArt. In this video, I want to show you how to manual partition your Linux installation. We discuss all different cases, especially for bootloaders, how you should do a manual partitioning. And in this video, we are doing it with Linux Mint. I'm already booted into the live installation medium. So I just created a USB stick and then booted from this USB stick into this live session from which we are now installing Linux Mint. If you don't know how to do the steps before, I'm gonna link you the full crash course for Linux Mint. There are also all preparations described which you have to do under Windows 11. This video can be seen as an addition to this basic video and only handles the partitioning for a proper Linux installation. I open up my installer, then I'm choosing my language, choosing my keyboard layout, and here we come to the next page where we can install our multimedia codecs. I highly recommend you installing your multimedia codecs, and on some systems you are asked, should you configure secure boot or should you not? I'm highly recommending not to configure secure boot because this only makes things more complicated, and if you really want to secure your Linux installation, we will do this in the next step. And on my system, I have currently Windows installed and also a Linux system, but I want to show you how to install a proper Linux installation manually. So we don't choose install Linux Mint alongside them, we choose something else, which is indeed our manual partitioning. And here the manual partitioner loads. To be honest, this view of this partitioning table is not the best. So I would say let us translate the whole view we have here into a better view. For that you can, for example, open up the program called disks. Here you can see all your disks and then you see all partitions. Otherwise, you can also open up gparted, which is also shipping with this live USB stick and which also many other distributions have, where you can also see your partitioning table. Let us draw this partition table and let's get a better understanding of which thing is what. For that, I am using draw.io. So this is our whole hard disk. At the current point, we have very simply to say one Windows partition. And then in this case, I already have a Linux partition like this. But it's completely irrelevant if you have already a Linux partition on your system or if you have not. It's also completely fine if you only have a complete Windows drive, which is currently installed. But this is not in real describing which partitions we do have. In reality, we have some more partitions. So let us create a new view. In my case, I have a NTFS partition, which is our partition 3. We can see this in our gparted by clicking on this one. And then we see file system NTFS. A NTFS file system is in very many cases our Windows partition. So I just say this is our C partition from Windows. I guess it's written like this. Then we have two small partitions in the beginning. The first one is something Windows related. This is this Microsoft reserved partition. So I go just with MRP for this. We don't have to bother with this with our Linux installation. We do not delete it, but we don't also use it. It's just Windows stuff. But at the very first point, we have a FAT32 partition. And this is very important because on many modern systems, we have some FAT32 partition in the beginning. And this is essential for having our bootloader installed, because in the end, we want to choose if we want to boot Windows or if we want to boot Linux right now. And for this to be functional, we need a separate partition from where we have our bootloader entries. This is also sometimes called EFI system partition and also has some flags like boot and ESP, which makes it really essential for us. And this is completely fine. This is only 100 megabytes big, as you see, so we only have 31 megabytes used. Don't give this partition too much space. 1 gigabyte is fully enough. 500 megabytes is also fine. And also, as you see here, 100 megabytes are also just fine. So this partition doesn't need to be very big. Here we have also some other NTFS partition, which is some Windows related stuff. This could be, for example, example, a recovery partition. This is in the very end here. So I call it NTFS Windows stuff, something like this. Now I have a Linux partition here, which we can see it is an ext4 partitioning, but also an XFS partitioning or Btrfs, so BTRFS file system could also be relatable to Linux. In this, we have not some letters for our drive partitions, we have so-called mount points, and this is the mount point /. This is my current setup. I put everything with blue with Windows, so we have this in blue, we have this in blue, and we have this in blue. I put everything in yellow with Linux. This is this one. And this FAT32 partition is very special. I put this in green because we need this partition for boot, whether we want to choose our Windows or if we want to boot our Linux. So this one is a special case. And let's discuss some cases. If you want to run only Windows, then this would look something like this. You have your FAT32 partition, something Windows related stuff and so on. You could also have, for example, a D drive for additional data. This is also completely irrelevant if this is at the same hard disk or if you have another hard disk. How does a Linux only system look like? For example, something like this. This could be a Linux only system. We keep the FAT32 partition here. But we could also split up this partition like D and C on Windows. We could do a Linux C partition, which is our mount point /, and the rest we want to have only our data. So this could be, for example, home. So this is all for our personal data, or we could choose what I sometimes do /data. But this depends from user to user. So I personally do not do separate home partitions, because if you have multiple Linux distributions and you are accessing the same home partition, then some configuration files from your desktop are clashing. And because of that, I'm putting all my personal data on data and have my personal folder with all configurations of applications on my root partition, so-called on Linux, so on this one. What you could also do is, for example, under Linux to have a second Linux. For example, we could say this is our Linux Mint, and this could be our Manjaro, for example, and both could use this third data partition. This would also be fine. So you see, we have plenty of options how to format our partitioning. So what do I actually recommend now? This, of course, depends on which use case you have. But I would give you one way I recommend most of the users, especially for those who are beginning. And for this, we take our system which only have a big Windows C drive, some special Windows stuff, and this FAT32 partition. I guess this is the most common case you have. So which approach do I recommend to you? I recommend you to shrink down the C partition and make space as much as you can for your Linux partition. At least if you want to run Linux in production, I would recommend you to create a minimum of 100 gigabytes free space. So you shrink down this partition at this side. For example, yeah, something like this. And then in the next step, I put my Linux Mint partition in here, and then we can run Linux Mint next to Windows. So if we start up our computer, we can now decide which system we want to boot. And the very cool thing about this, if you sometimes then say yourself, okay, now I want to switch from Linux to Windows only, or if I want to delete Linux, then this is very easy. The first thing, if you want to delete Linux again, you just go into the Windows system, then delete this Linux partition, and then just make your Windows partition bigger again. But also the other way is possible. So if you want to delete your Windows system some month later, you could also do this very easily. So you can delete all your Windows stuff, for example this one, and can expand your partition to the right. And on the left side, we could also delete our partitions. And then because we can't really expand a partition to the left side, this is not possible, we could create a new partition, something like a data partition or D partition, for example, where we can later store some additional data. And then we have converted our Windows only system to a Linux only system in a few steps, and you always have the option to go back, for example. But in the end, it depends completely to you. So now, what do I want to do for this video now? The current case of my computer is this one. What I want to do now is to shrink down this Windows partition and install a new Linux system next to my existing Linux system to this place. So I say new Linux mint, something like this. If you do not have this exactly case, don't close this video, because from now on we have the theory and we can do the praxis very easily aligning to the things I'm showing to you. But before we start now right away with our plan, there is one thing we have to discuss in the end, and this is this green partition. What's so special about the green partition, and does every system need such a green partition? And this is where it gets interesting. It depends on your current boot mode and also on your partition table you're using on this hard drive. I created a very easy decision tree how to do this. We start from the top. Do we need an additional partition for our bootloader, so such a green partition, or do we not need such a partition? At first, we have to decide which boot mode are we currently in. Are we currently in legacy BIOS system, or are we currently in our UEFI boot mode? It's very important to have all operating systems on your hard disk on the same boot mode, because otherwise you can't really switch them very easily. But how do we find in which boot mode we are in? The most of all modern systems have the new UEFI boot mode, but some older systems might stick to the legacy BIOS mode. So let's get the information. In our Linux Mint live distribution, we could this check very easily if we open up a terminal and if we type a very simple command. This is the command ls/sys/firmware/EFI. And if we see a similar output here and we see not an error message, then we can be very sure that we are booted in EFI mode. And of course, if we have a look to our partition table, we also see such an EFI partition. So on all EFI booted systems, we have to have a EFI partition because we already installed, for example, Windows here. There has to be also an EFI partition in it. If there is not an EFI partition in it, then the systems currently installed on the hard drive are maybe not in EFI mode and they are in the older mode legacy BIOS. So you have to ensure that you booted this on the same mode like your installed systems. So in my case, everything's fine. If we go up the decision tree and we have the boot mode UEFI, which I currently have, then we have to have a bootable FAT32 partition. So this so-called EFI partition, this is this green one we have here. For most modern PCs, this is very easy. For older PCs, it's getting more interesting. If we have the legacy BIOS mode, this is also sometimes called CSM on your BIOS system, then we have to check the partition table. Which partition table do we currently have? We can see this, for example, in our gparted. If we go to view here and then we select device informations, and here in the device information you see the partition table, and if there is GPT, then we have to take this path. If there is not GPT and there is MBR or master boot record, then you take this path. If you are in legacy BIOS and you have MBR partition table, you don't need any of these additional tables. So you won't have any green partition on this, but this is only on older systems with legacy BIOS boot node. Also keep in mind, if you have the MBR partition table, the maximum of so-called primary partitions you can have is 4. So for example, if you have an MBR partition like this, then this partitioning would be impossible. What you could do then is, for example, delete some Windows related stuff, because this is very much often just the recovery partition you don't need, and then do something like this with your partitioning. Then this is just fine. Otherwise, if you are in legacy BIOS boot mode and you have the so-called newer GPT partition table, then you need a reserved BIOS space partition. Just remember that then you have to create a very special partition. But to be honest, this is very unlikely. So I would say it is not as usually to have this option here, because all newer systems have the GPT partitioning here, and all older systems with legacy BIOS have the MBR partitioning in there. But you could have special cases where you have this option here. But normally you have UEFI boot mode, and then you have to have a FAT32 partition, which is our green one. So I would say let's do exactly this as we see it here. On the upside, we see our partition table we need to apply, and on the downside, we see our real system. What I am doing now is to open up my installation back again. Here we are in our installation menu, and we have a look if we can shrink down our Windows C partition. So I select change here, and then we can select the size. For this, it is very important that you only select a size. You can shrink down here. It's also completely fine if you do the shrinking here in your gparted before you start the installation process here. So what I'm doing, to be honest, is go back in this installer here. I go back again. Here we are. Perfect. I disable configure secure boot again. And then I open up my gparted table. And then I right click this NTFS partition, because this blue partition I want to make smaller. So I right click resize move. And then I can drag and drop the size I want to resize. And then I can also see the following free space. So I'm taking 40 gigabytes for this. This is fine for me. I select resize move, and then I hit apply all operations, and then I hit apply again. This takes a bit of time, and then all operations successfully completed. Then we have some unallocated free space. This is the very best case, to be honest, because then if I select continue here, then the Linux Mint will detect this free space and will install itself in this biggest free space we have for this. So this could be also very, very easy now, but we want to do it on our own. So I select something else, and then I select continue. Here in continue, I then see our free space here between the SDA3, so this Windows C partition, and this Linux partition. So I'm basically creating this partition right now. So I go to this free space, select plus, and then I can select the size. The size is completely fine because it is the exact size I have at free space here, so we don't need to change anything there. Then we can define the type for the new partition. Please always choose primary, especially on the newer systems, and then location is just fine for us. Use as ext4 journaling system is completely fine. This is the default for Linux Mint and also for Ubuntu and Debian and so on. And if you're using Manjaro, I guess it is a ButterFS somewhere here, ButterFS journaling file system, but I'm choosing and keeping it on ext4. I highly recommend you to use this file system your distribution recommends you, and in this case it's ext4. And then we can select our mount point, and this is kind of the definition if this will be our C drive so-called or our D drive and so on. But yeah, on Linux we have mount points, and every Linux partition needs a mount point called / or root, and so I call this mount point and then hit OK. This takes a bit time. Okay, nice. Now we have our new partition defined here, which is called now in our case SDA6, which is fine. But let's pretend that there isn't any Linux installed here, and we want to use this partition as our data partition, for example, or our home partition if you also want, but I highly recommend you using it as data. How to do this on your installer? In this, I could define it as use as ext4 partition, and then we only have to define our special mount point. So you then select the home mount point if you want to create a separate home partition. And if you want to create a special data partition, you could very easily then choose the slash here and then just type data afterwards. This would be also completely fine. And then we could define this as our slash data partition. I'm not doing this because this is another Linux system. So I select change again here at the usage and then select use as, and then I select do not use the partition. Otherwise, if you have to create a EFI partition yourself, then you create a new partition and then select use as, for example, EFI system partition. Very easy. And if you have the very uncommon case in our tree that you have to use a reserved BIOS space partition, then this partition would be use as reserved BIOS boot area, it is called. So this would be the other case. But in my case, I have an EFI partition here, you see. You also see something with Windows Boot Manager, but this is completely fine. You can install more boot managers on an EFI partition. Also, we see here the device for bootloader installation. We see /dev/SDA. This is completely fine. If you could choose the specific EFI partition you want to install it, but normally you don't have to do this. The system finds it by itself. So just make sure that you have selected your right hard drive here. I am only having one hard drive here, so this is very easy. And then the rest is done automatically. And this is it for partitioning. What you can do beside the normal alongside installation and what the automatic installation is doing for us. So with this, you could keep more control. Now in the end, I want to discuss a very special case, and this is how to create an encrypted Linux partition. And this is where it becomes a bit more interesting. Let's pretend that we have this partition layout. We have our normal FAT32 partition, we have our Windows stuff, and we have our one Linux Mint partition. If you have an additional home partition, then this is also fine. And then if you want to create an encrypted Linux Mint installation, then you have to do one extra step. We have to create a new partition which is called /boot, because we need an unencrypted boot which sets up our modules that we can unencrypt the rest of the system, and with which we are encrypting our system. We are encrypting it with LUKS. So LUKS is the encryption system of Linux, which does it really, really well. Just make sure if you want to create an encrypted Linux installation, then you have to do a separate /boot partition, and the size of this /boot partition should be around 5 gigabytes, maybe 10 gigabytes. This is completely enough. This is also working very similar, for example, if we compare it to Ubuntu and some other distributions, of course. If you want to do that, you could delete the partition I want to create with our Linux Mint. So for that, I would now create at first my boot partition. So I select size. I say 3 gigabytes. This is enough. So 3000 megabytes. Primary beginning of the space is fine. And I select use as ext4 journaling file system. And then I select mount point /boot. And then I select OK. And then on the rest of my free space, I hit plus, and then I select use as physical volume for encryption. And then I say security key. I define my password with which I want to encrypt the partition. And then I hit OK. This takes a bit of time. Afterwards, we have a Linux device mapper, and this is called dev/sda7 crypt. This is a special thing here now, and if I scroll down in the partition table, I see my boot partition, but then I see an unknown partition, because this dev/sda7 unknown partition is now very above here, and then we see our ext4 type system type unknown, which is inside this crypt thing. So I select this crypt thing, hit change, and then I select use as ext4 journaling system. This is fine. And as a mount point, I select /, and then I hit OK. This takes a bit of time. And then we have created also an encrypted partition. So to wrap this, my current installation now looks like this. And then I have my other Ubuntu, it is called here, ext for Ubuntu. And this is my encrypted Linux partition here. So maybe I define it like this, encrypted with looks. And inside this encrypted container, I have this ext4 Linux Mint partition. And this is it for our partitioning guide. So in the end, I hit install now. And then we see, hey, some things have been done and so on. I select continue and then I can finish my installation. Dublin, I say here, perfect. I type in my name. Please do not choose the encrypt my home folder option because this is very old and you don't want to do this. Yeah, we encrypted our system otherwise, as I have shown you in the minutes before. And then I select continue and then, yeah, our Linux Mint is installing perfect. So this is how we want it. As you see, it can be as detailed as you want. But my advice, just keep it maybe kind of simple. What I would do for my personal laptop, for example, and if I want to encrypt it, then I would do the following thing. I won't get rid of this boot partition because I only need this boot partition if I encrypted my root system here. So if I just go with my ext4 Linux Mint partition here, and then instead I'm encrypting my data partition, this would be, to be honest, my setup because, yeah, it's kind of very easy. I am only having 2 partitions and I only encrypted my data I want to, and the rest is completely fine. But of course, yeah, this completely depends on you. And in the end, if you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And if you want to see more advanced stuff like this, just write it me into the comments and then we will also do a video about this. So see you in the next one. Bye.